The southeast coast of England 100 years ago. As the Great War began, one town was turned on its head by a flood of troops and refugees. With its eddying currents of humanity, it became a hotbed of espionage which helped change the course of the war.
The Germans couldn't stay in one place for more than a week before they were bombed.
And it became a natural home for the collection of information. Oh, corpses, many of them horribly burnt, even in the trees. God, this is amazing stuff. For the fruits of the latest spying techniques.
The map maker, it was said, could write 1,600 words on the back of a postage stamp.
And for an extraordinary cast of characters.
The fact that he was a fraudster and a liar and a thief somehow transfers to actually being the guy we want to push forward once he gets out of jail.
Characters who were ready to risk everything.
And if they got caught, they were going to get shot.
These are the spies who loved Folkestone. We all love stories about spies, and as an author I've created one or two fictional spies myself. But when a country is at war, secret information is a serious matter. It is the key to victory, and hundreds, maybe thousands of lives can depend on a few scant facts. Where armies use brute force, spies use their brains. They don't call it intelligence for nothing. Just before the war started, Folkestone was an ordinary coastal town, a place to enjoy the fun of the seaside. But that wasn't to last. Thousands of Belgian refugees fled across the channel. In those days, the ferry went from Flushing in neutral Holland to Folkestone.
Well, they were all pouring into this place. Little sleepy Folkestone suddenly found itself a hub for soldiers, for would-be soldiers, for spies and would-be spies.
We're going to look at some remarkable characters. You might call them the spooks of the Great War, who operated out of Folkestone. They could easily be something out of a novel. And we begin with the spy master lurking in the shadows, Major Cecil Aylmer Cameron. He was certainly an interesting choice for this particular job. The thing about Cecil Cameron was that he had form. In fact, he'd been involved in something of a national scandal. A few years earlier, his army career seemed to be going well.
You've met my wife, Ruby?
But he and his wife needed money, and they hatched a plot involving a string of pearls.
They had rented a pearl necklace worth £6,500.
That's an awful lot in today's money, of course.
Absolutely, in those days. And they'd insured the necklace and then lost it somehow. They were done for an insurance fraud, basically.
Cecil Aylmer Cameron and his wife were convicted in Edinburgh. They both got 3 years.
And that was all happened in Scotland. And because Aylmer Cameron was the son of an Indian Army hero, a man who had the VC, the officer class in London decided this was some sort of Scottish stitch-up. The fact that he was a fraudster and a liar and a thief somehow transfers, because of this officer class attitude, to actually being the guy we want to push forward once he gets out of jail.
Once he was out of jail, about the only option available to him was the shadowy world of espionage.
When he first got back to London, he was foisted on Mansfield Cumming, who was the head of what we now call MI6, but was then called MI1C, where he completely messed up. He was absolutely useless, and he really, really upset everyone around him.
But the officer class in the army still thought he was a first-rate chap, so they took him off MI1C and put him in charge of military intelligence in Folkestone. And despite Cameron's lack of people skills, he did set up a highly effective spy network. Jim Beach from the University of Northampton is an advisor to the Military Intelligence Museum, and here they have some surviving agent reports which would have passed through Cameron's hands.
What we have here are instructions and also reports written on tissue paper so that they can be easily secreted about the person, and also very easy to dispose of the paper if you thought you were at risk of being caught. And then what we have from Folkestone itself, a sort of typed up version, and we see here train movements and its report CF, Cameron Folkestone 759, issued on the 21st of March 1917.
In the Grand Hotel in Folkestone, I've enrolled in our very own low-tech spy school. Here I'm learning that some spies would smuggle messages using nothing more than a candle and a small fruit.
One of the ways in which secret writing was undertaken was by the use of lemon juice. Here's the candle.
Oh, I can what I can do is, can I do that?
You can do that.
Oh, no, something's happening. Look, letters are forming in front of our eyes. It says, meet at GRA, it looks like. It looks like at the Grand. It's here. Meet at the Grand. So somebody has sent me a secret message on a bill to meet at the Grand in lemon juice. And this is what they did in the First World War.
Exactly.
A German called Karl Muller was caught spying in Folkestone when his letters were found to contain messages in invisible ink. One gave details of troops in the town. So to fight back, what Major Cameron really needed were refugees who could learn techniques like this and be turned into spies. When I wrote a series of books about a teenage spy called Alex Ryder, I never dreamed there'd once been a real-life original. But there was. In 1915, a 17-year-old Belgian refugee arrived in Folkestone harbour. The boy's name was Léon Troulin. As soon as he arrived, he tried to join the Belgian army in exile, only to be turned away because he was too short.
He said, well, perhaps I could offer my services as a spy, which is exactly what he did. He went back across the channel. He got his friends, some of them 15, 16 years of age, to spy on the Germans. They were known as the glorious teenagers, and yet they were highly effective in bringing back information here to Folkestone. Him and his child spies, they did invaluable work, and as I say, all brought back to Folkestone, collated here and used by the British Army to attack the Germans. It was a big adventure, but it was an extremely dangerous adventure because they were going behind enemy lines, and if they got caught, they were going to get shot.
There are still some remains of Folkestone's secret spying history, if you know where to look for them. This building, overlooking the harbour, was once the German consulate. And it had this room at the very top with all these windows. It would have been perfect for the Germans. They would have had an excellent view of the harbour and all the British troop movements going on below. Sadly for the Germans, but hardly surprisingly, the consulate was closed down when war broke out. This building, number 8 Marine Parade, was a fashionable hotel until the end of 1915, when suddenly, almost overnight, it vanishes from the records and nobody speaks about it again. That's because it had become the headquarters of Army intelligence here in Folkestone. By a strange coincidence, the building is now owned by a current serving Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Martin Neame.
So here we have the entrance hall to what was a hotel. I'm afraid it's very derelict, which is why I've purchased it to turn it into flats.
Presumably you knew nothing about its history at that time?
No, I know nothing about its history. This is all a big surprise. Must have had a great contribution towards the winning of the war, I assume.
Oh, they say that these spies saved hundreds, if not maybe thousands of British lives,
right.
Absolutely. Inside this building, the day-to-day business of espionage would take place.
You've got the head of the office, Cameron, who is there in terms of sort of direction, and then he will have a series of sort of junior officers working beneath him who are either out of the office doing recruitment and training and liaison. Then they would also have officers who would be decoding and sorting out the reporting, and what you would also have would be connections and visits from your representatives in the Netherlands, who would then be operating the agents on your behalf.
And being yourself a serving Lieutenant Colonel in the British Army just back from Afghanistan,
Indeed,
that's quite a coincidence.
It
How do you
is.
feel about owning a piece of British military history?
Well, it's fantastic, actually. I'm quite taken aback. I had no idea. I really just looked at the property as being an investment from the perspective of buying it and doing it up and turning it into flats and bringing it back into use. But no, the fact that it has some sort of military history as well is just outstanding.
And it's inside this building where one special spy would have been taught the tricks of the trade. Not a Belgian refugee this time, but a well-connected French woman. Her name was Louise de Betinhi.
Louise de Betinhi was the daughter of quite a well-known family with aristocratic origins who had fallen on hard times.
She was from a small town near Lille in northern France. She was partly educated in England and spoke several languages. Lille was invaded by the Germans in October 1914. Louise was so devastated when she saw the damage that, as a patriot of France, she decided to do whatever she could to fight back. She was passing through Folkestone, and of course she was spotted straight away as perfect spy material. She was university educated, she was well connected, she spoke several languages, and she was female. What could be better? And so Louise was trained in all the latest spying techniques and put on a boat straight back to France. One of the names she operated under was Alice Dubois, and she recruited a ring of female spies called the Alice Network. They would, for instance, send information back about where the German military units were sighted.
The Germans couldn't stay in one place for more than a week before they were bombed, because all the information was coming back to Folkestone.
Louise's great-nephew is Berta De Betinhi, and of course the memory of what she achieved is kept alive in the family.
Avec un certain humour, les Allemands disaient que cette femme, à elle seule, valait une division.
Elle a sauvé beaucoup de vies anglaises, n'est-ce pas?
Certains estiment que, autour d'Armentières, elle a dû sauver la vie de plus de 1000 soldats anglais.
One resistance fighter, a Monsieur Sion, refused to believe that this rather delicate-looking woman was really working undercover for British military intelligence. He wanted proof, so he added his own note to the bottom of one of her spy reports that she said was going to be sent back to Folkestone.
Monsieur Sion, Senior, wrote, "If this person is who she says she is, could you please bomb a particular place on a particular day at a particular time?" And one was a munitions dump. I think the other was a gun emplacement or something. So she took her message to Flushing, and I think it was taken over to Folkestone. And at the appointed time, appointed hour, hey presto, the bombs fell.
They never questioned her again.
And they never questioned her again.
One technique Louise used to smuggle secret reports was to stitch tiny messages into her clothing.
She was lucky enough to have a friend who was a map maker. Most of Louise's messages that came over here to Folkestone came in the form of this very, very small writing. The map maker, it was said, could write 1,600 words on the back of a postage stamp.
Major Cameron wasn't the only person operating an espionage network out of Folkestone. Another spy turned up with the perfect cover. After all, who would suspect a priest? Father Pierre-Marie Cavois-O'Caffrey was a priest of Irish-French descent. He had already been working as a spy in northern France. And just like other intelligence organisations, he realised that the Flushing to Folkestone ferry could be a vital source of information.
He sees all these Belgian refugees around him. He suddenly thinks, well, actually, if we had an office in Folkestone, we could collect intelligence from these guys and we could send them back.
After all, the Belgian refugees knew where all the enemy troops were, because that's what they were running from. So O'Caffrey would board all steamers from Holland, asking questions. And from there it was a small step to send some of them back to work as spies for him. And so Father O'Caffrey set up his own network of agents, regularly transmitting very useful information across the channel. How do we know this? Because his files have surfaced here at the National Archives. Phil Tomaselli discovered several large files relating to the work of O'Caffrey at the National Archives in Kew, in Surrey. These are the actual field reports that O'Caffrey's spies sent back. They should have been kept secret in the MI6 archives, but they somehow ended up in the more public National Archives. But even then, it wasn't easy for Phil to get some of the documents released by the authorities.
They normally take 6 weeks to be opened. It took 9 months on this one. I kept getting letters saying we're having to refer it to another department. So I said, I know he's a spy, I can prove it. I know he worked for MI6, I can prove it. And they kept delaying. Eventually, they opened the file and they'd taken a couple of pages out, copied them and carefully blanked the information they didn't want me to see.
But the pages we're going to look at here have never actually been seen.
These ones have not been seen before.
That's exciting. Many of the documents are daily reports coming in about aviation.
So they're telling you what's going on in the various aerodromes, how many aeroplanes were flying, where the Zeppelins were at any one time, suggesting targets. That in Ghent there's a factory that's repairing machine guns, good idea to bomb that.
So how is this information getting across the channel? Well, back at the School for Spies, I'm learning that one incredibly simple but effective technique is to use a template. This seems to be a perfectly innocent letter. But if the writer and the reader both have the same template, significant words can be buried inside the writing.
Well, this is interesting. Here is Frederick writing to Annette and making reference to Aunt Nancy.
Oh, but it's not Nancy the name, it's of the person. It's Nancy, the little town in France.
I think you're right.
Subtle, very clever.
I think you're right.
So it
there
says
we have
14, a reserved division at Nancy, the 20th, depleted.
Absolutely. Presumably, the spy masters knew exactly what was meant by that message. And of course, if it meant they were depleted or would be depleted on the 20th, what a good day to mount an attack.
So at this time, Major Cameron was running a network for the Army, while O'Caffrey was running a completely separate network for the Navy. But this doubling up was a good thing.
It works much better to have separate networks where people don't know each other, so that if Germans roll one network over, the other network's still there.
Some of the reports really do stop you in your tracks, like this one about the Germans' new secret weapon, the Invisible Aeroplanes.
It says that in Dusseldorf, 30th of July 1915, yesterday we had an opportunity of convincing ourselves that the new aeroplanes are practically invisible. The wings of the aeroplane, it says, are made of a new substance called cellon. They must have been really rather worried.
And it turns out that the reports were actually true. But they needn't have worried. It didn't really work as a camouflage, and the invisible aeroplane, in a sense, disappeared. The spies would have to get information from occupied Belgium into neutral Holland, but the Germans had built an enormous electrified fence on the border.
So how do we get messages across that fence?
You throw something, tell me.
You could throw something. What sort of things would you throw?
Oh, if it was me, I would throw hollowed out vegetables, or possibly possibly some kind of little sack of some sort. I don't know. You tell me.
Yes, you might, because don't forget, the land on either side of this border high voltage fence was agricultural land.
Ah, right.
And British intelligence, our army intelligence.
Oh my God! Don't tell me I was right. I was right. Look,
you were right.
It was a mangel works or something. What is that? A turnip? A turnip.
It's a turnip.
And they would what? They would hollow out the turnip. Is one of these hollow?
I don't know. Is it?
Surely not. You're not going to have a. I want to tear this open now.
Yes.
They all seem to be They seem to be completely intact.
Oh dear, that's disappointing.
No, there's nothing unscrewing. But tell me how do we find the
well,
message?
that's of course exactly what we want. Had you been a suspicious German policeman and looked at them, you haven't discovered what is. Let's use our pen. The pen is useful for many things.
Uncork it and pull out. To pull it out. This is so great. And they just threw that over the fence.
Threw it over the fence.
And then collected it, took it home.
Yep.
Took out the message.
And that found its way across Holland to Flushing onto the boat which brought it all the way to Folkestone, where Cecil Cameron would read it.
And back in the National Archives, there is one report received by O'Caffery which seems to leap off the page. It describes how a British plane attacked a Zeppelin at Gontrode on the 7th of June 1915 at 2:15 a.m. Flames burst out of the airship and were soon seen to envelop it. 2 terrific explosions were heard, and the airship, broken in two, was crushed down to the ground. Corpses, many of them horribly burnt and charred, were seen amidst the debris, others on the roof and even in the trees. God, this is amazing stuff. It was said that a corpse fell right through the roof of the Café Saint-Amand and was found horribly mutilated in the kitchen of that establishment.
Yes.
Spoiled someone's dinner, I bet. During the day, little boys were selling pieces of the wrecked Zeppelin to the inhabitants. Gosh, that's an extraordinary piece of writing, really, for a dry official report. O'Caffery was gathering intelligence like this in parallel to the work of Cameron's agents, and of course, given what Cameron was like, the two did not get on. I know you write mainly factual books, but the way you talk, this all sounds like an extraordinary piece of fiction. I mean, it does sound stranger than life.
That you've got a wonderful protagonist in O'Caffery and you wonderful antagonist in Alma Cameron. The whole story is just brilliant. You don't even need the Germans. You've got a hero and villain already.
There's no doubt that all the spies we've encountered inflicted huge damage on the enemy. But what became of them? Louise de Betinhi was arrested by the Germans near Tournai in Belgium on the 20th of October 1915. She'd been operational for just 9 months.
We think she was tortured, I'm sure she was, but she never gave anybody away. She remained silent and stoical.
At first, she was condemned to death. Then her sentence was commuted to a life of forced labour. But while in prison, she fell seriously ill.
She had, first of all, pneumonia, which then developed into pleurisy with an abscess. And they refused to let her go to hospital to have the operation. She had to stay in the prison.
She died in 1918. There is a memorial to her in the military cemetery of Notre Dame de Lorette, near Lille in northern France. The name of Louise de Betinhi is almost completely forgotten now, but she almost certainly did as much to save British lives as any secret agent in the Great War. Léon Troulin was caught on the frontier near Antwerp, trying to re-enter Belgium. Léon was arrested by the Germans and brought to the very spot where I'm standing now, and executed by firing squad. He was 18 years old. Léon Troulin wrote to his mother in his last letter, "I forgive the Germans, they did their duty, but they have been very harsh on me."
Comment ça va?
O'Caffrey went on to work for what became MI6. We know that he went to Greece and got married on a forged British passport. At the outbreak of the Second World War, he rejoined the Navy. Doing what exactly, nobody knows. No photograph of him is known to exist. And Major Cecil Aylmer Cameron had a mysterious fate. Although his work did more to help the war effort than most army officers, no photograph of him is known to exist either. And for reasons that are not clear, he shot himself in 1924. So would it be true to say that in one sense, what we now call MI6 and modern spying sort of began in Folkestone?
MI6 had existed a little bit before there and run a few agents, but when it comes to running big networks, O'Caffrey's was one of the first. So in a sense, yes, it is the start of MI6's agent networks that spread right the way throughout the world during the war and which are still there today.
When we look back at the First World War, we think of poppies, muddy fields, the trenches of northern France. But that's only part of the truth. Walking through a town like this, it's all too easy to forget that the war was fought here too. 100 years ago, Folkestone had a vital part to play in the secret work done by brave men, women, and children. And even now, it's impossible to say how many lives they saved.